wanted to start out with this article. I had mentioned Caroline Glick before. Is that showing up?
So,
And I just picked up on this article this afternoon, and I didn't get a chance to print it off, so I thought I'd throw it up on the screen. It's a pretty long article, and the areas I've highlighted in red are the ones I'll go over. I'm not going to go over everything, but if you wanted to get it, it's on the internet. You just go to Caroline Glick and it's 360 degrees of hostility, the Biden administration and Israel. Now, I keep mentioning these things about what the current administration is doing relative to Israel because God's made it very clear that if we curse Israel, we're going to be cursed. It's just one of the things that He's laid out in the Abrahamic covenant, and she covers a lot of things. She's very she has a lot of connections. She knows more about what's going on in Israel than most people. I think she was a Pulitzer Prize winner. She's been writing for the Jerusalem Post for many years. But just a couple of things I wanted to go over. And I'll just go over quickly some of the things I've highlighted and read here. The mothers of IDF soldiers group led a demonstration last week for army mothers. This is in Israel. They demanded that President Joe Biden stop leveraging power to force Israel to resupply Hamas. And what we're seeing now is while it was great that Blinken and others and Biden and so forth came out early on in support of Israel, I think a lot of things going on this on behind the scenes are borderline extortion, as far as I'm concerned. We had elections last year. This is one of the representatives from this group. She says, this is in Israel. I don't recall voting for UN Secretary of State Anthony Blinken. Blinken is sitting in the war cabinet and protecting the interests of my enemies. We have sons in Gaza. We have sons fighting. They tell me the Americans are threatening not to provide us with ammunition, and I've heard that if we don't meet their demands or if they don't meet our demands, we'll cut back on their supplies. And unfortunately, Israel doesn't manufacture any of its own weapons or munitions. They have to import it, most of it from the United States. So it provides the administration the opportunity to hold this sword over their heads. And as Bibi has said, Netanyahu has said over and over again, they have to wipe out Hamas. And if they don't, they're just going to go through the same things over and over again. The rising expressions of rage at the Biden administration from ordinary citizens are a testament to the shock and anger Israelis feel at what they perceive is a betrayal of Israel's most basic interests by Biden and his top advisors. And I can tell you that this is right up the alley of Bible prophecy because, first of all, we don't see any reference in the Bible when we get to the last times of the United States. And I think we would all agree with what we're seeing. We're on pretty slippery slope. It's kind of like we've got one foot in the gutter and the other's on a banana peel. So things are not going well, and I don't think that our decline. It's interesting that other articles I've read over the past that one of the biggest fears that many of our so-called allies, including Israel, has is the decline of the United States, and with that comes a lot of issues. So the rising expressions of rage at the Biden administration from ordinary citizens are a testament to the shock and anger Israelis feel at what they perceive as a betrayal of Israel's most basic interests by Biden and his top advisors. 3.5 months ago, when Biden came to Israel, most Israelis couldn't imagine his warm embrace would transform into a torrent of hostile actions. He said, quote, I come to Israel with a single message. You are not alone. You are not alone. As long as the United States stands, we will stand forever and we will not let you ever be alone. For the overwhelming majority of Israelis, Biden's declaration sounded like a bankable guarantee. but for the few with more sensitive ears, it sounded like a threat that he and his administration would never leave Israel alone to fight the war uh, to victory. The administration has never let Israel alone to win the war, whose outcome will determine whether the Jewish state can long survive. At every turn, at every quarter, the United States is constraining, undermining, subverting, coercing Israel to make moves that, as Shahar said, are against the interests of citizens of Israel. The United States is intent on reaching a ceasefire, and I think I saw a headline today that Blinken's over there again trying to organize a ceasefire, which makes sense if there's a chance we could get the hostages back, because the Biden administration remains committed to its strategic objective of appeasing Iran at Israel's expense. Over the past several days, the U.S. media has reported claims by U.S. intelligence officials asserting that Iran is not responsible for the war being waged by its proxies, Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis, and the Iranian controlled Shiite militias in Iraq and Syria. Can you believe that? I mean, that's just incredible. I mean, it's so obvious, but they're starting to deny that Iran had anything to do with it. Intelligence officials insist these terror armies are attacking the United States and Israel because Israel is fighting Hamas in Gaza. If Israel were to stop fighting, all the troubles would end, right? From an Israeli perspective, the prospect of ending the war without dismantling Hamas is an unacceptable outcome. On January 23rd, Shin Bet, which is basically Israel's equivalent to our CIA, Director Ronan Bar informed Israel's security cabinet that 60 to 70% of the so-called humanitarian aid entering Gaza daily either goes directly into Hamas's hands or is commandeered by Hamas terrorists for their use. You can see it right on the internet where the supplies arrive in Gaza. The Hamas leaders or the Hamas members are beating away the normal citizens with batons and sticks and so forth. They don't really care that much about their people. Under such circumstances, it is clear that the Biden administration's pointed and ever escalating demands that Israel permit more or less unlimited entry of supply-laden trucks to Gaza amounts to a demand that Israel resupply its enemies in the midst of a war. From the outset of the war, the Biden administration has strongly opposed Israel's efforts to persuade the Egyptian government to permit the people of Gaza to leave the area through the Rafah border crossing, and that's another thing that the citizens in Gaza are unable to leave. Egypt won't take them. Um, Jordan won't take them, but there are many nations that will. In between the administration and this UNRWA, this probably seen all the news that's come out on these United Nations organization that we talked about. I don't remember a few weeks ago, being an organization dedicated solely for the protection of the Palestinians. There's no other UN organization that protects or is dedicated solely to any other group in the world, just the Palestinians. And it's been in existence since soon after the Israel became a nation. Uh, U.S. Secretary of State Blinken reasserted U.S. opposition to permitting Gazans to leave the area. I mean, that just makes no sense. But again, I think once you fall under the control, this is just me speaking, of the control of the enemy, of the control of Satan, that you can no longer make sense out of what's going on. Things become totally illogical. The United States unequivocally rejects any proposal advocating for the resettlement of Palestinians outside of Gaza, he exhorted. Since October 7th, multiple countries, including Czechia, Turkey, Scotland, and Canada, have stated their willingness to permit Gazans to seek refuge in their countries. Qatar, which serves as Hamas state sponsor, is another option. Rafah is a short drive from El Arish International Airport, where these refugees would be able to fly to third countries, but they won't let them go. It's not just that Egypt and Jordan won't allow them. Given the circumstance, the U.S. position requires Israel to choose between defeating Hamas at a profound cost to civilian lives or being defeated itself. I mean, that to me is basically extortion. You know, it's either you do it our way, which what gives us the right to go in and tell Israel what to do? You know, and to sit in the war room with them and to be so be the way they are. On January 28th, NBC News reported that the administration is considering slowing supplies of various weapons, including 155 millimeter artillery rounds and joint direct attack munitions to Israel to compel Israel to scale back its ground operations in Gaza and permit more supplies to enter the area. So this is prophecy. This is seeing the stage being set for Daniel 12, Daniel or Zechariah 12, Zechariah 14, so many other places in the Bible where it says that Israel will literally be alone in the world. And between what we're doing and Great Britain has basically stated, or they're threatening to acknowledge or to recognize a Palestinian state, as we'll see here in a moment. That's another thing that our administration's threatening to do. Israel is rapidly moving to the time, as clearly outlined in what's going to happen with Israel in the last days. Although the White House denied the reports, the IDF, which is Israeli Defense Forces, had been compelled to conserve its ammunition on the ground due to shortages in supplies, indicating that the United States is slow walking its supply of key armaments to Israel. This is of major concern, particularly given the near certainty of escalation along the northern front, where Hezbollah controlled Lebanon is moving quickly toward a full scale war with Israel. For Israelis, October 7th was an illusion shattering event. One of the primary illusions shattered was the two state paradigm. On October 7th, it was Hamas that initiated and led the slaughter of 1,200 Israelis, but thousands of Gaza civilians followed them into Israel and were full participants in the atrocities, including murder, rape, torture, kidnapping, and looting. I'm jumping over a bunch of stuff. This is interesting. Polls taken since October 7th show that three-quarters of Israelis oppose the establishment of a Palestinian state. In fact, a Hamas leader just came out and himself said, we're not interested in a two-state solution. That what we're interested in is getting rid of all the Jews in Palestine. There's no interest in a two-state solution in Israel or in among the Arabs. Only the United States, it seems to be supporting it. The Arab Nationalist Party and the Islamist Party believe that there is no chance of peaceful coexistence with the Palestinians. This position places the Israeli people rather than simply the government at odds with the Biden administration, which since the outset of the war has insisted that its strategic goal is to establish a Palestinian state in Gaza and Judea in Samaria under the leadership of the Palestinian Authority. It was Biden who came out and said that the Palestinian Authority is not the same as Hamas. Well, it's not true. They're identical in terms of their attitude toward Israel. The PA, for its part, not only refuses to condemn the October 7th slaughter, but seeks to form a unity government with Hamas. But yeah, we're forcing or pushing toward a two-state solution with the Palestinian Authority. Biden and advisors state regularly that Hamas does not represent the Palestinian people. But the Palestinian people disagree wholeheartedly. According to the Palestinian pollsters, 75% of Palestinians support Hamas, Last week it was reported that the State Department is considering unilateral U.S. recognition of a state of Palestine, much like the European Union is threatening to do and Great Britain is threatening to do, that we are going to recognize the state of Palestine. In spite of what Netanyahu and his government says, in spite of what 70% of the people say, in spite of what even Hamas says, such a move would not merely be an act of hostility, would not merely be an act of hostility against Israel. It would constitute a material breach of the Oslo Accords. Polling of Palestinians in Gaza, in Judea and Samaria found that more than 80% of the Palestinians support the massacres of this October 7th. But of course, our government's saying that Hamas and the Palestinian Authority are not the same. According to Israel police data from Samaria and Judea, also known as the West Bank, in 2023, Palestinians carried out 5,600 terrorist attacks against Israel. At the same time, last Thursday, President Biden issued an executive order that imposes sweeping economic sanctions on Israelis deemed by the Secretary of State or Secretary of Treasury to be engaging in so-called settler violence, which is just a made-up term. These are people Israelis that are living in the West Bank. And the executive order was issued against 4 Israeli citizens who have not been accused or convicted of any felonies. The determination of who to sanction appears to be informed entirely by unsubstantiated allegations presented by Palestinian advocacy groups that do not recognize Israel's right to exist. And I won't go on anymore, but I think we get the point that what we're seeing here is incredible pressure being brought to bear on Israel. It's kind of like if you think about it, let's just say that Washington D.C. was attacked by a terrorist group or a foreign nation. But we're going to fight. We're going to defend the people of this country, and we're going to make sure that whoever committed it is defeated, just like Germany was defeated in World War II. A lot of destruction left in Berlin and Germany as a result of that. And so let's just assume that we're in a state of war, and now we're going to allow some foreign nation to sit in with the Secretary of Defense and Department of State and other or Secretary of State and the President, and literally try to tell them how to go about what they're supposed to do. And that's exactly what we're trying to do to Israel. And I keep going back and bringing this up because to me, this and uh, this explosion of anti-Semitism around the world is so telling.
Who's the author of that piece that you've been reading?
Caroline Glick,
Glick.
Glick, Caroline. Yep. So, any questions on that? I mean, it just demonstrates that what we read in our Bibles is true. And it also demonstrates how quickly we're moving toward the time of Jesus' returns. So many things happening so quickly.
I'm just so surprised that I didn't think Israel would allow people outside Israel to be so awesome. Forcing them to do things.
Right. I think it's because, yeah, and you're right. It's
That's
and they're not.
surprising.
Netanyahu's made it very clear that they're in this battle against Hamas for the long run, basically going against what the administration's doing. So now we know that the Netanyahu government's probably going to fall. There'll be another election. And so this administration is certainly not going to get behind him. They're going to get behind somebody that is more amenable to what our demands are. But I'm not sure that's going to happen, even if new leadership comes into play in Israel. This is an existential threat for that. This is,
Why do you think that? If you just said that 70% of the Israelis support,
they want to fight,
Right.
then why, if they elected a new a new government there, why would it be amenable to the United States?
No, that's what I'm saying. I don't think they would be.
Oh,
I don't think they would be.
Oh.
I can't imagine any of those that you would think. In fact, the one person I can't think of his name that's in the Likud party, which is where Netanyahu is, who's being rumored, is more of a hawk than Netanyahu. So he's certainly not going to do it, even those that are on the other side. So it's interesting how everything shapes comes together. In Israel, when a new person is elected prime minister, they have to form a coalition. They have to get 50 vote or 60 votes in order to win an election. So that requires, because their particular party usually doesn't have that many members, so they have to bring in coalitions to get to the majority so that they can form a government and implement the administration. Um, Interesting that Netanyahu has formed an alliance with those uh, with strong religion. I can't remember what the name of the party is, but with the religious groups in the Knesset, which really hasn't happened before. So why do I bring that up? Because as we're going to see when we get back into Daniel 9, there is a move right now in Israel to rebuild their temple. In fact, we may see an event which I'll talk about taking place in just a month or two around Passover that is going to blow the minds of a lot of people around the world, and that is the sacrifice of the red heifer. Well, could take place in just the next couple of months. And so, in order to appease his base and the religionists, if you will, who are pushing for this third temple, may mean that Netanyahu now will support the rebuilding of the temple. And as we see when we get to Daniel 10, chapter 9, there has to be a temple during the tribulation period. And I'll show you a couple of videos in just a moment that talk about the red heifer and really what's going on in terms of Israel's efforts to rebuild the temple.
A lot of Christians, evangelical Christians that are backing Israel.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But what's happening is that, and it could happen to all of us, I think it's important.
What's in my mind? I thought I could print it.
But
I just decide and go into books. It's not mine. I shut mine off. I'm sorry.
no, the evangelical community, for the most part, is behind Israel, but there are those who are not, and I think it's important. It's important that the church stands behind Israel, and we're not seeing that like we should. But really, the biggest supporters that Israel has is the evangelical community. Okay. Okay, a lot going on in the economic front. Things continue to not bode well for our economy, for the world economy. I'm not sure if I've talked much about BRICS. BRICS is a group of nations that was formed 15 years ago or so. And BRICS consists of Brazil, China, India, um, South Africa, and Russia. And since within the last few months, they've added several other nations. 15 more nations have been trying to gain membership. They think they'll probably accept another two or another 50% of those or so. And Uruguay is soon to become a part of it. So now, in addition to the five main ones, you have the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, Iran, Ethiopia, Argentina uh, was approved and agreed to it, but they've backed out because Argentina now has a gutsy president. I don't know if you heard him speak at the World Economic Forum, but he blew their socks off because he's a capitalist. He got up and he just blasted participants in Davos, which was just a couple of weeks ago. Fascinating guy. Just saw a video of him at the Wailing Wall in Israel, praying at the Wailing Wall, and just tears just coming down his eyes, coming down his cheeks. So there's a real solid player, but unfortunately, he's only one. But the point is that this group is now represents roughly 60% of the world's GDP. And what they are doing is they formed this bank back in 2014, 2015. It's called the New Development Bank. And it's been funded to the tune of about $100 billion. And what they are beginning to do is to loan money to member nations. When I say loan money, it's the same as coming in and buying US bonds and treasuries, only they're doing it through this development bank. They're not buying US treasuries or US bonds. And so instead of buying our, what we call our debt, what they do is they'll come in and they'll say, we want to borrow $100 million and they'll agree that it'll be repaid in 10 years or 20 years or whatever for the 100 million plus a certain amount of interest. That's what's really kept the United States afloat is this system of buying and selling debt. So now we have the BRICS group that has formed this new bank called the New Development Bank. They're beginning to trade among each other, very woke in terms of diversity, equity, inclusion, all these other types of things. And what they're doing is lending money or selling their debt to their member nations. And so these member nations are now being funded with other than the US dollar. And it's a big deal. They've already come up with 28 billion that they've loaned, and basically what they do is they say that they're loaning um, to developing nations so they can build infrastructure and water projects and that type of thing. So rather than coming to the United States and us loaning them, if you will, big chunks of money in exchange for a 10-year note or whatever, they're not doing that anymore. And that's one of the main things that has fueled our economy ever since what they call the Bretton Woods Accord back right after World War II, when it was agreed that the US dollar would be the reserve currency. The other thing I found very interesting is that right now we have what's called it's really kind of a system. The world government has really been, what's the word I'm looking for? There's a term, it just escapes me right at the moment. But um, the United States has been kind of the world's leader for a long time. We're the superpower. And it's what's called a unipolar form of world government with it's either unipolar or bipolar, which means you have one or two most powerful nations that kind of control the whole world. Well, with us in decline and so forth, what BRICS is trying to do is to develop a multipolar uh, form of world government. And by that, I mean various groups or organizations like BRICS around the world. Instead of everything being basically under the control of the United States or Russia or China, you're going to have all these different groups. And if you look at Daniel chapter 7, my view is that that's exactly what we read about in Daniel 7, where it talks in verse 24. It talks about the 10 horns. And you see this also repeated in Ezekiel or in Revelation chapter 13. This is an end time prophecy about 10 nations. And 10 horns are 10 nations under 10 leaders are going to come from this kingdom. So at the end of the age, there's going to be 10 groups. some say 10 nations, but I think now that most feel that it's going to be like 10 regional groups of nations that are going to control the whole world. And out of this 10 group nation or 10 member body will come what we see is referred to as the little horn or the Antichrist. There's going to be this new 10 member nation or 10 groups of nations. Oh, thanks. That out of which the Antichrist will come. So before the end of the age, there has to be 10 nations or 10 regions. And so with things like BRICS, I think that's just one giant step in that direction. And I also think, without being a conspiracy theorist, this thing with our border, which makes no sense whatsoever. I mean, if you watch the news and now you see these attacks and crimes in New York City being committed by illegal immigrants, and the millions that are coming over and just unwilling to do anything about it. Thank the Lord for Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House, who's doing everything he can, thank you, to put through some meaningful legislation. But with all this that's going on, they're trying to put forth a bill that will send another $100 million to Ukraine and just a little bit of money to the border. My point is, I think that there's a case that can be made that this border thing is without a doubt intentional. And why is it intentional? I'm still trying to wrap my head around this, but I think there's a variety of reasons. One of which is that these people that come in tend to vote a certain way, so they're trying to create a permanent voting bloc, which would ultimately lead to a one party system. The other thing is that, globalization and, the current administration are big time globalists. That there could be an attempt to ultimately bring together, like BRICS, another group of nations, which could be South America, Central America, or Mexico, United States, Canada, some sort of organization like that could be in the offing. Because with it, that's why if you don't have borders, you don't have a nation. And so that's one of the things that also could be going on.
Bob, they can't vote, but what they can do is increase the population. But illegal immigrants cannot vote. But
Some
when they
places they
increase
can.
the population, they can round up the den, can round up, and that will cover more of the population to vote toward that. That's what it is, but the illegal immigrations, until they take their citizenship, they can't vote.
But they're trying to put forth a bill where they can vote pretty
But they
quickly.
haven't put it through
No,
yet.
not yet, but that's coming.
But there are some states where
California,
they
have
can
people
vote.
that have been getting off the buses
Depends.
and they give them an ID card. With the ID card, they can
There are
register to
states
vote. They're
that they
registering them right and
Yeah.
what they're doing.
Right.
And
But those are illegal.
Doesn't
yeah, but
matter.
they're voting. They're voting.
What do you mean getting off the bus?
They bring them up to
They
the
bring
border.
them
Oh!
all
They
over
bring
the
them to
bus
the border in
all over.
I
California.
missed something.
And then, well, I went to vote this year in Connecticut. You don't have to show an ID. I went to
Yeah.
vote in Connecticut this year, and just to test it, they asked for my driver's license. I said, no, I don't have to give it to you. I said, there's no law that says I got to give it to you. She says, well, how will we know you live here? So because they told me. And they couldn't do anything about it. Now, funny, I said, look, I'm just busting you, but I just want to prove to you how ridiculous this is. Because we went and got a absentee ballot. And we got our absentee ballot, and I said, do you want my license? She says, no, you don't have to show me.
Wow,
Yeah.
that's so wild.
You do in
Wow.
Burlington?
Well, this is in
No,
March.
this is a new law, this was before this last primary.
We didn't still have one. What month is that?
When did they have it? Just
2 minute clip here
December,
where
November?
the state, they were
When did
talking
it-
about
This
this,
was- we went-
the states. Talking about
Was like 2 years
from
ago.
there.
Oh, I'm talking about the
Oh,
primary
yeah.
now. You don't have that. Is it just Connecticut or all over?
I'll tell you about it all over.
All right, let's get back out of here.
Find it all over. No ID.
Okay. Yeah.
The Democrats are more, majority of the mail-in votes, and the Republicans show up. So you know who to tell.
One more quick article that
Confidence in voting is just that.
Like, all right. Well, people see it, you have to go with the word.
okay, along the lines of what we just read, here's just a quick article, and then I'm going to get back into our look at Daniel 9. But this article came out February 3rd. And it's entitled "Poking God in the Eye." Um, Zechariah 2:8 says that Israel is the apple of God's eye. And so when you do what our administration and others in the world are doing to Israel, it's just like sticking our finger right in God's eye. Biden looks at options for a Palestinian state. This stuff is everywhere, and it's just amazing to me that they just don't get it. You know, we know the risk there, you know, that the dangers of all the things they're doing with the fentanyl, and you know, I just heard that 30,000 Chinese have come over the border and have just disappeared into the country, and people from Iran and Syria and Somalia and other places. And you know, like somebody was saying, it said people from China, they don't just leave China. You know, it's very strict. I mean, you have to have permission to leave the country. And so, what are these 30,000 people doing? We just don't know. Are they spying or what? But it's just not the actual objective things they're doing, but just what they're doing to us in terms of God and what his reaction to our treatment of Israel is going to be. But here's an article that says the Biden administration is bucking decades of U.S. foreign policy by considering a plan to unilaterally recognize a Palestinian state despite deep opposition to the move within Israel. And I won't go through that, but just the very last paragraph. As reported on several options the Biden administration could take, including bilateral recognition of a Palestinian state, withdrawing its veto power against the United Nations Security Council, admitting, quote, Palestine as a full UN member state, and urging other countries to recognize a Palestinian state. British Foreign Secretary David Cameron said on Monday that the United Kingdom was considering recognizing a Palestinian state. So it's everywhere. It's full blown. And the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob is not going to sit back and allow this stuff to go on for too much longer, in my view. Okay, so I want to get back into any questions on any of that?
Yeah.
As a church, do we support Israel?
Pardon me?
As a church, do we support Israel? Because do we support Israel as a church?
Yes.
Yeah. I mean,
No.
Do we? I don't know who's come out and say it.
no,
Do you
I
mean
know.
monetarily?
No,
What do
I
you mean?
mean to support, like stand with them.
Stand for them.
Stand with them.
Yes.
Have we said it? Have
Yeah,
we?
I'm just curious because I don't hear it.
Don't hear. I've never heard it stated.
No, I know.
Right.
No.
I think individually, I would say the preponderance.
Do you have any idea what you're doing?
of Church do.
Yeah,
I don't
organization.
know the
Well, I
church.
did until
I
my
don't know the
computer got
organizational
screwed up.
churches that
Yeah.
we're standing here. I know. Do we? Yeah, I think we do, but. I
Is
don't
that
think
up there?
we're finding formal proclamation in writing that says that, but I don't know that for a fact. I would have to check it out.
Well, Federer or whatever his name is, that pastor, he just did something about when he first came here. Who?
Thunderbird.
Oh, what's his name? Thunderbird. Anyway, his name. But anyway, he said in his sermon that people were asking him how he voted. And he would not answer. So I think you will find the same answer for this question. Where do people stand? Because it is their Democrats, right? They don't have to. That was only 3 weeks ago.
Okay, I heard him speak, he was great.
I mean, I would encourage us to be careful about context. As far as the state.
Yeah,
No,
I agree.
I agree.
So, it is important. I mean, I would love to say if you ever look on Amir Sephardi's website, he has pictures of people from churches all over the country that are supporting Israel with Israeli flags and groups that are committed to supporting Israel. It's important. It's important that the church does that. And I have to say, I have a problem with churches that don't. Big time problem. Just I get myself too deep into this, but at any rate, back to Daniel chapter 9. Okay, I think the last time we got together, we got through a couple of pages of this PowerPoint I put together, and I think we all know the basics of it. And what I'd like to do is just continue because there's some real interesting things now that are going to unfold, hopefully, as we move forward. We went through this first slide on Daniel's kind of an overview of Daniel's 70-week prophecy, that this prophecy is a prophecy that is designed to address a total of 490 years, of which 483 have already taken place, as we'll see in just a moment again. And yet there's still one 7-year period yet to be fulfilled. So the focus on this prophecy is strictly Israel, as we see in the very beginning. We get into the prophecy here, where it says in verse 20, this is Daniel who received a visit from the angel Gabriel, and was told in verse 20, while I was speaking and praying, confessing my sin and the sin of my people Israel, and making my request to the Lord my God for his holy hill, which is a reference to Jerusalem. While I was still in prayer, Gabriel, the man I had seen in the earlier vision, came to me in a swift light about the time of the evening sacrifice. He instructed me and said to me, Daniel, I have now come to give you insight and understanding. As soon as you began to pray, a word went out, which I have come to tell you. So this is Gabriel giving Daniel a word directly from God. In other words, God tells Gabriel, go and tell Daniel this, and make sure that he records it, so that it's available for future generations, just like us, being able to read this and understand it. Which I came to tell you, for you are highly esteemed. Therefore, consider the word and understand this vision. 77s are decreed or determined or decided. What this means is that it's set. It cannot be overtaken. In other words, God has said here, there's going to be a period of 77s, and a 7 represents, in this case, a period of 7 years. So there's a period of 77-year periods, or a total of 490 years in the future. And I'm going to tell you when it will begin. 77s are decreed for your people and your holy city. So this total 70-week period, this total 490 years, are decreed for your people and your holy city to finish transgression, put an end to sin, atone for wickedness, bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy place. Where we got through all of that. So,
One of your translations says at the beginning of verse 24, 77s,
yeah,
plus mine says 70 weeks.
yeah, it's either weeks or they both mean the same thing. Some translations say 70 weeks. You have the King James or?
No, NASB.
Okay, yes, it's 70 weeks, 77s. When they did the NIV and some of the other translations, they just changed it from 70 weeks. So it's often referred to, if you see up here at the very beginning, I have it listed as Daniel's 70-week prophecy. It means the same as 77.
70, 70 units of 7 is enough.
Right.
Hmm.
Was that what yours says? 70 units of 7?
Well, it's a side note. It's
Oh, okay.
four,
Okay.
70 units of 7.
You probably explained this 1,000 times, but how is 70 weeks times 7, 490 years?
Because a week represents a period of 7 years. 1 week equals 77 years. It's what's called and I'll get to it a little more clarity in a moment, but it's what's called a heptad. It's a period of 7. So the 7 could be weeks, days, months, but because earlier in this chapter we see a reference to 70 years, a 70-year captivity, this obviously means a period of years. So you have 70 periods of 7 years each. Okay. All right. So God makes it says here 77s are decreed. This is etched in stone. It can't be changed. And we know from history that the first 69 weeks have transpired exactly the way God laid out. So the determination of the end of the 69 weeks provides the exact time of Christ's crucifixion. And that says here that 77s are decreed for your people and your holy city to do all the things that are said here, finish the transgressions and so forth. And then in verse 25, know and understand this. From the time the word goes out to restore and rebuild Jerusalem. Okay, so this 70-year or 70 week period or 77s will begin when a decree is issued to rebuild the city. Now, there were 7, right now, Daniel is in the time of the Mede Persians, which had defeated the Babylonians. He was taken captivity during Nebuchadnezzar's time, during the early portion of the Babylonian empires. And because he had been reading Jeremiah and other texts, he knew that he was at the end of that 70-year period of captivity. So he knew that something was going to happen and that the people were going to be allowed at some point in the not too, he's probably been there 67, 68, maybe even close to 70 years at that point in time. So that prophecy that was given in Jeremiah was about due to expire. From the time the word goes out to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until the anointed one, the ruler comes, there will be 7 sevens and 62 sevens. It will be rebuilt with streets and a trench, but in a times of trouble. Okay, so what do we mean here? This is where it gets a little bit confusing. But what Daniel is being told here is that this 70-week period, or this 490-year period, will begin specifically when a decree is issued for the Israelites to leave Babylon under the control of the Mede Persian Empire and return to Israel, to Jerusalem, to rebuild the city. Because when the Babylonians attacked it, some 70 years or so earlier, they destroyed the temple and they devastated and made desolate, if you will, the city of Jerusalem. So it had been lying in that condition, in that state, the whole time. And so now Daniel is being told here that there'll come a point in time when a decree will be issued to go back and rebuild the city. Now, several decrees were ultimately issued. Remember Cyrus, the first king, or one of the first kings of the Mede Persian Empire, being, I think, a man of God. I've mentioned before, I think we'll see him in heaven when we get there. But he issues a decree that allows them to go back to rebuild the temple. So he very clearly said you can go back and rebuild the temple. And there were other decrees, but that's not the one that's mentioned specifically here. If we go back to the book of Nehemiah, chapter 2. Let me just go through a couple of the points on this particular slide. The determination, like I said, at the end of the 69 weeks is the exact time as Jesus' crucifixion. And so when this prophecy, this first part of this prophecy begins until 69 weeks has transpired. At the 69th week, as we'll read in just a moment, is when Jesus was crucified. So identifying the date when the decree to rebuild Jerusalem is crucial. The city, not the temple. There are four different decrees, as I mentioned, issued during the time of the Persian Empire, which is the empire that defeated and overtook Babylon. The one that pertains to Daniel's prophecy is the one that was issued by Artaxerxes Longimanus to restore and rebuild Jerusalem. This occurred, as we see here, in the 20th, I think I have 12th year in my notes, but I think it should be 20th year. In the 12th year of, it should be the 20th, the misprint here. This occurred in the 20th year of Artaxerxes' reign, as we read in Nehemiah chapter 2, verses 1 through 13. Let's just take a look at that. In the month of Nisan, in the 20th year of King Artaxerxes, that's Nisan, and represents the 1st of March, which has been researched and determined to be precisely March 1st. And we know from that his 20th year in rule was 445 BC. So we know that in the month of Nisan, in the 20th year of King Artaxerxes, when wine was brought for him, I took the wine and gave it to the king. That's Nehemiah. I had not been sad in his presence before. So Nehemiah is what's called a cupbearer. And his job was basically to test the wine to make sure that it was okay to drink. And so he had been a faithful servant of Artaxerxes for all that period of time. I had not been sad in his presence before, so the king asked me. So the king knows Nehemiah. He said, "Why does your face look so sad when you are not ill? This can be nothing but sadness of heart." I was very much afraid, the Nehemiah speaking, but I said to the king, "May the king live forever. Why should my face not look sad when the city where my ancestors are buried lies in ruins, and its gates have been destroyed by fire?" So he's Jewish, obviously. He's in the king's court, if you will. Has a very high position, but yet he's a Jew at heart, and he knows the condition of Jerusalem and the temple. The king said to me, "What is it you want?" Then I prayed to the God of heaven. And he's shaking in his boots because he's basically a slave with a high position to King Artaxerxes. And he answered the king, "If it pleases the king, and if your servant has found favor in his sight, let him send me to the city in Judah where my ancestors are buried so that I can rebuild it." Then the king, with the queen sitting beside him, asked me, "How long will your journey take, and when will you be back?" So from Babylon to uh, Jerusalem is, I don't know how many miles it is, but it's a pretty healthy trip. And of course, they didn't have trains and planes and automobiles in those days. I said to him, "If it pleases the kid, may I have, so it's, how long will your journey take, and when will you be back?" "It pleased the king to send me, so I set the time." So in other words, Artaxerxes said, it's okay to go. I said to him, if it pleases the king, may I have letters to the governors of Trans-Euphrates, so that they will provide me safe conduct until I arrive in Judah. So it's kind of a dangerous trip. Uh, Mede-Persian Empire was the empire of the time, and so Jeremiah or Nehemiah is asking for this permission, this document, this decree, if you will, to make this trip. And may I have a letter to Asaph, keeper of the royal park, so he will give me timber to make beams for the gates of the citadel, by the temple, and for the city wall, and for the residence I will occupy. So remember, Daniel says that, or Daniel's told that when the decree is issued to rebuild the city. So that's what's happening here, is that decree is being given by Artaxerxes to Nehemiah to make the trip and to rebuild build the city walls in the city of Jerusalem, not the temple. And because the gracious hand of my God was on me, the king granted my requests. So I went to the governors of Trans-Euphrates and gave them the king's letters. So the decree had been issued. And we know, and as I say down in here, a little bit further on the third page, in 1882, a Sir Robert Anderson, this is the seminal study that's been done on the 70 weeks. Anderson published his conclusions in his book that identified the precise time period. Based on Nehemiah 2:1, he determined the 12th year of Artaxerxes' reign was to be the first of Nisan, or March 14th, 445 BC. It's the only place in the Bible where you actually find a precise date, and he was able to determine that. Through a series of calculations, Anderson determined that the end of the 483 years, or 69 of the 70 weeks, was April 6, 32 AD, which is the precise day that Christ was crucified. Even if Anderson's calculations are slightly off, the Messiah was to arrive at the end of the Second Temple period, 483 years from the date of the decree was issued. The end of this time period coincides with the time period when Christ carried out his 3-year ministry. This explains why Jesus admonished them for not recognizing the time of their visitation, of his visitation, or their visitation, and we'll take a look at that in just a moment. So the study has been done, and it's considered to be the authoritative study on this time period by Sir Robert Anderson. And so we know from what we read here in Nehemiah chapter 2 that the date of this 70 week period began exactly on March 1st, or March 14th, 445 BC. Okay. So now what we have to do is to go forward. Now, when Anderson did his study, he had to do it based upon the Hebrew, or the Arabic, I think it was the Hebrew calendar, which was 360 days. So it was, the calculations he did was based on a 360-day calendar. There's a calculation necessary when you get to the day zero, if you will, and then for leap years and so on and so forth. But when all of that is calculated, the time from the decree that was issued until Jesus was cut off, as stated in Daniel 9, was exactly 483 years. Everybody with me? And that's why this is such an amazing prophecy, because it's precise right to the very day. So, what we have here is here I think. The 70-week prophecy serves as a template for end times prophetic portions of the New Testament, including the Olivet Discourse, Second Thessalonians, and the tribulation chapters 6 to 19 of Revelation. So we get to the 70 weeks. So the time period as established, is basically divided into 3 periods. So we go back to Daniel 9. I hope this has been concise. They're not the brightest bulb on the tree, and I find it, to be honest, somewhat difficult to explain this. So, well, at any rate, 70, so I'm back in verse 24 of chapter 9. 77s, a total of 490 years, are decreed for your people and your holy city. So this entire 70-year or 70-week period is for the Jewish people. There's no reference anywhere to the church. And that will include the final 7-year period yet to come. That 7-year period, and also known as the tribulation, the day of the Lord, the day of the wrath, is primarily for the Jewish people, for the redemption of the Jewish people. Verse 25, know and understand this, from the time the word goes out to restore and rebuild Jerusalem, that's what we just saw, as outlined in Nehemiah chapter 2, until the anointed one, the ruler, excuse me, the ruler comes, there will be 7 sevens. So this first 69 weeks is broken into a period of 7 sevens and then another 62 sevens for a total of 69. It will be rebuilt with streets and a trench, but in the times of trouble. So what this means is that um, Nehemiah and others that went in, excuse me, to rebuild the cities ran into a lot of resistance and a lot of trouble. And that's what this time of trouble is talking about. But then after the 62 sevens, so it's after the first 7 plus 62 more, a total of 69. So from March 14th, 445 BC, add 69 weeks, or a total of 483 years. I think it's 173,880 days, something like that. From the issuing of that decree until the end of the first 69 weeks takes us precisely to when Jesus was cut off. And then it goes after the 62 sevens, the anointed one. Now, the anointed one references the Jesus Christ. That represents the Messiah. So, the anointed one will be put to death. So, in other words, after the 62 sevens, the anointed one, the Messiah, the Holy One, will be put to death. He'll be crucified and will have nothing. Now, in some translations, what's it say in yours, Fletch? Instead of have nothing, what does yours say? It's if you read verse 26.
9.
Yeah.
And after the 62 weeks, the Messiah will be cut off and have nothing, and the people of the prince, who is to
Okay.
come, which is the Romans,
Yeah.
will destroy the city
Yeah.
and the sanctuary.
So verse 20 says, what I was looking for is in some translations, it says that instead of it says we'll have nothing, it says shall be cut off, but not for himself.
No,
New King
Yeah, I
James,
have
New
that.
King James
Yeah.
Version.
Yeah.
New
Yeah.
King James Version,
Yeah.
26.
Okay.
And
So
after the 62 weeks, the Messiah shall be cut off, but not for himself and
that's
the
good.
people of the prince
Right.
who is to come.
Right. So the key here is after this 69 weeks, Messiah is going to be cut off, which means killed, but he's not going to be cut off for himself. He's going to be cut off and killed for others, for us, for you and I. So this is a clear prophecy of the time when Jesus was crucified. The people of the ruler who will come will destroy the city and the sanctuary. So what's being said here? The people of the ruler who will come will destroy the city and the sanctuary. So this is a reference not to the anointed one, but to someone else. The people of the ruler who will come. That's a reference to Antichrist who will come in the 70th week, which is yet to take place.
For some
And
reason,
so,
I've got that as the Romans who will come to destroy the city in
right,
70
and that's what
AD.
it is. So when Jesus was killed, was crucified, the empire that was in control or in authority at that time was the Roman Empire. So what's being said here is that at the time Jesus is uh, killed, the people of the ruler who will come will destroy the city. That's what happened in AD 70. In 70 AD, the second temple, which had been rebuilt and started under Zerubbabel and was rebuilt, and then Herod came in and retrofitted the temple to be this magnificent structure. But as Jesus said, and as we read here, that temple was destroyed a second time, and it has not been it's not been built or replaced since then. The second temple has been in um, desolate, has been destroyed ever since. So it says that the people of the ruler who will come, the ruler who will come is the Antichrist. And so that's why, you often hear things like, well, the Antichrist could be a Muslim or the Antichrist could be this or that. It seems as though because the people of the ruler, he's going to come out of the revived Roman Empire. Most believe he'll be a Gentile and he'll come out from somewhere probably in Western or maybe even Eastern Europe. But that's where he'll arise from. I think he's alive today. He's over there. He's being prepared. He doesn't know he's the Antichrist. We won't know who he is, as we'll read in Second Thessalonians, but that's where he will come from. Will come, will destroy the city and the sanctuary. The end will come like a flood. So the end what? The end of the age is going to come like a flood. War will continue to the end, and the desolations have been decreed. So if you go back to Matthew 24, Jesus makes reference um, to the looking for where he says that there will be great tribulation. Um, if we were looking in chapter 30, pardon me?
21. Verse 21.
Yeah, 21. So I'm sorry. Thank you. 24, 21. For there will be great distress, unequaled from the beginning of the world till now, and never be equaled again. If those days had not been cut short, no one would survive, but for the sake of the elect, those days will be shortened. In other words, when this takes place, will be during a time when humanity has the ability and the power to totally destroy itself and destroy the earth. We're in that time now. We have the weapons that could certainly take place. But for the elect's sake, those days will be shortened. So what we have here is a reference in Daniel 9 to the time of desolation, and Jesus referencing, again, in some translation, it says this will be the time of great tribulation, which is a reference to the second half of the tribulation. So then in verse 27, he will confirm a covenant. So one of the things that we're hearing a lot about today, when you hear about forcing a two-state solution on Israel, that is tantamount to confirming or enforcing. And that's basically what is being said here. It's not just confirming a covenant, but in the Hebrew, this actually means will enforce or impose a covenant on Israel. And I'm not saying that what's going on right now is this, but it says that he, Antichrist, will confirm or enter into a covenant or probably a peace treaty with the many, which is a reference to Israel, for a period of 1/7. Okay, so there's your 70th week. 69 have already transpired. taking place. We're waiting for the 70th week. And the 70th week is one 7-year period, also known as the tribulation. It will begin when Antichrist enters and confirms this covenant with Israel for this 7-year period. In the middle of the seven, so in other words, during this period of time, the more I think about it, I think this is when Antichrist will allow Israel to rebuild their temple. I think that's what's going to take place. So, in other words, he enters into a peace treaty or an agreement with Israel. And think about Israel right now, that they're just hated by the world. Everybody's against them. You got all these things taking place. They're going to line up. They're going to be more than willing if somebody strong and prominent offers them a peace treaty, offers to take care of them, to allow them to be in peace and security. So Israel's going to enter into this agreement. Now remember, Israel, the Jewish people, don't think that Messiah has come yet. I think very likely they will, at least at the beginning of the tribulation, look upon Antichrist as their Messiah. He's finally come. He's taken, and Jews today are looking for the Messiah to come. But then in the middle of the seven, exactly 3.5 years, and we'll delve into this next week, um, he will put an end to the sacrifice and offering. And at the temple, he will set up an abomination that causes desolation until the end that is decreed is poured out on him. So this is where it gets really fascinating. What's being happened if we turn over to chapter 11, verse 13. We read, I'm sorry, verse 31 in chapter 11. His armed forces, this is a reference to the Antichrist, will rise up to desecrate the temple fortress and will abolish the daily sacrifice. Exactly what we read here. He will put an end to the sacrifice and offering. At the temple, he will set up an abomination that causes desolation. So what's an abomination? An abomination is anything that defiles the holy of holy, the inner sanctuary of the temple. We have an example of this back in the time of later on in the time of the Mede-Persian Empire, when a certain Jewish or a certain Persian leader, it was an Longimanus, I can't think of his name right off the top of my head, but we get a full account of what happened in Daniel chapter 8, that this fellow hated, he was a leader of the Mede-Persian Empire. He hated the Jewish people. He hated Israel. He literally had a pig sacrificed in the Holy of Holies. That was called an abomination. So we have a foreshadowing of this final abomination, which is where Antichrist himself will enter into the Holy of Holies of this new temple and expect to be worshiped as though he's the Messiah. That is the abomination of desolation, exactly as Jesus references in Matthew 24. A lot to be said there, a lot of really fascinating things. But interesting, and I've got a couple of videos. I'm not going to show them now. They're real short. Next week, one involves the Temple Institute and where they are in terms of being prepared for a new temple, because this clearly says there will be a temple. There's no temple right now, but this says he will set up an abomination that causes desolation until the end is poured out on him, and he will put an end, and at the temple he will set up an abomination. So there has to be a temple. So the temple has to be rebuilt. And somehow, some way that's going to happen. There's a lot of potential scenarios. So I want to just quickly go back. One very interesting thing I mentioned earlier, that something very interesting could happen Passover this year. Turn back to the book of Numbers real quick. Numbers chapter 19. Anybody heard about the red heifer?
Yeah.
All right. Well, very interesting that the red heifer it appears there were 5 red heifers raised in Texas, and they were shipped over to Israel. And the red heifer is necessary for the Jewish people in order to purify the high priest and others to sacrifice a red heifer. It's a cow. And this red heifer has to be 3 years old and has to be unblemished, which means if there's any 2 black hairs on it, if there are any white hairs on it, is disqualified. Of the 5 that have been taken over there, 1 has been disqualified, and 4, from what I understand, are still qualified. And they have to be 3 years old. They were 2.5 years old last March. They'll be 3 years old. Guess what? In March of this year, which is uh, Passover. So, in order to comply, that heifer would have to be sacrificed, killed, burned, the ashes turned into have poured water poured in on the ashes, made into some kind of paste, and done sometime between Passover and one of Israel's uh, holy days in June.
Where did they do it?
They will do it on the Mount of Olives because it has to be at a place on the Mount of Olives. 9 years ago, the Mount of Olives was sold to a Jewish fella who has said, I just saw him interviewed today in a YouTube video, that that's where the sacrifice will take place. And it has to be in a place where they can see Temple Mount. And from this spot where they plan to conduct this sacrifice, and Mount of Olives, if you've ever been there, is right directly across. You have a perfect view of the Temple Mount. You got the Mount of Olives and the Kidron Valley, and it goes up, and there's the Temple Mount. So there's a perfect view, and that's where the sacrifice will have to take place. Many are predicting that that will take place around Passover. How much further off is that going to be? And also, let me just, if I could, bear with me here. This is fascinating stuff.
Yeah.
If I can find it. Yeah, that's not it. Okay, listen to this. One of the big fears now, Temple Mount or the temple has to be built on what they call Temple Mount, which is where the Dome of the Rock is, which is where the remnants of the temple are. Very sacred. It's considered to be one of the most sacred um, site. It's the most sacred site in the world. And so the only place the temple can be built is on Temple Mount, because that's the only place where they can perform their sacrifices. They can't do it in a synagogue, and it can only be done there. So somehow, according to what we read here in Daniel and many other places, there has to be a temple. So listen to this. A Hamas spokesman was interviewed on TV on January 14th, 2024. It was a video that was played on TV, and the Hamas spokesman seemed to say Hamas started the Israel Hamas war to stop the Jews from sacrificing a red heifer and rebuilding the temple. On January 26th, there was a more extensive article, and here are a few points about what the Hamas spokesman said. And we'll go into it next week unless you want me to read it now. We're running late. Okay, let me do it quick. The Hamas leaders believe there is a religious reawakening in Israel. There is. There is a hue and cry to rebuild that temple that will lead to the destruction of the Alaska Mosque on the Temple Mount. It seems unlikely that both can exist. They might be right about that, but also, as we read in Revelation, I think there's a chance that they both could exist at the same time. Hamas attributes this religious reawakening partly to the fact that the Jews now have red heifers that can be sacrificed. That's a huge deal. If they sacrifice this red heifer, when they do, whether it's this Passover or if it's not this Passover, by a certain time, then they're going to have to bring in other ones. because they have to be 3 years old. So if they wait too long, it'll be too late. The spokesman called the teaching about red heifers a legend that is rooted in Mishnah text. Hamas believes the problem is greater than religious Jews believing a legend. Of course, they believe that the Jews, believe in a legend or a myth. That's because the Israeli government is moving away from its claim to be a secular government. It's becoming more conservative, and it's showing an eagerness to work with the Jews who want to sacrifice a red heifer and rebuild the temple. So, this whole thing with the red heifer in the temple is causing great concern. And as we've always said, if you want to know where we are in God's prophetic time clock, look no further than Israel. That Israel is the hour hand, that Jerusalem is the minute hand, and Temple Mount's the second hand. So we slowly see, along with everything else that's going on, all of this coming into view. I'll show you those videos next week. They're fascinating.